So it's a good time for a recap of what's happened against what happened in 1944. And we'll start from 11:30, which was the point the scenario started. Unless otherwise stated, these reports are from 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr Yeomanry. So back at 11:30, 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr Yeomanry reports that it is beginning its push on Bourguébus. 11:38, heavy AP fire is reported from Fresneville, pinning down troops of their left squadron. Their direction of travel is south, so as we're looking at it, that's our right or A squadron. They appear to be somewhere east of Four, probably slightly further off the game map between Four and Le Poirier. 11:42, they're told not to go for Fresneville, but to go for their objective via Bourguébus and Tilly-Campagne, which is at the very bottom of this map. Brigadier Harvey, the commander of 29 Armoured Brigade, which is our parent unit, has been hearing about our heavy losses and checking map preferences has drawn the incorrect conclusion that 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr is deviating eastward. By the time the 11:42 message was sent, all of 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr's tanks that are west of Four, which were capable of moving, were falling back in a northerly direction. So, in real life, whilst B Squadron got hit pretty hard in the killing field, they've not been quite as foolish as I was, carrying on with that charge to the south. 11:52, there's reports of 4 unidentified tanks moving south from Fresneville. These are possibly SP guns that are pulling back. Then at 11:55, there's reports of 4 camouflage tanks at grid reference 083605. At 12 o'clock, tanks are seen moving into Bourguébus, and then at 12:05, 29th Armoured Brigade orders 23rd Hussars to move up to the area of Grenfell. The book notes that they're likely to have taken a route around the west side of Le Mesnil-Vrementel, avoiding the route our C Squadron took into the killing field northwest of Cagny. 23:14, 8 probable Tigers are seen moving into Bourguébus from the southeast. Around this time, Colonel Scott, the commander of 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr Yeomanry, had concentrated on attempting to reduce enemy resistance in the village of Four. The remaining tanks of A Squadron were attempting to shoot F Company into place. From the men and battle books, around the same time, the forward observer that's been calling in air support appears to be wounded, meaning that a junior needs to be brought up to take their place. We then get a big jump to 12:40. 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr report that they are 800 yards short of Bourguébus, keeping west of La Hogue, which is again at the very bottom of this map. The motor company is reported in Four, and it's being held up currently by 8 tanks. This log is noted as misleading, so it's showing some confusion in the location. The height difference could be confusing their distance judgment to the ridge, and it's also noted that holding Four is quite unlikely at this point. 12:45, they now report they only have 20 tanks left. Heavy fire from Cagny was stated to be the cause for most of their losses, so this is C Squadron prior to our scenario. The logs then show that 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr Yeomanry are told to clear Soliers. 5 minutes later, 3rd Royal Tank Regiment is told to try and clear up to Bras, and if possible, Hubert Folly. And at 12:55, 23rd Hussars is told to move up to 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr to clear up to the Bourguébus. This is probably because 2nd Pfeifenvorfahr are struggling to hold their ground, let alone take another village. We'll finish at 12:58 though, where a more realistic command is sent, so 23rd Hussars is told not to come further south than Soliers. These last 15 minutes illustrate how unpredictable events are and how quickly things can change. 29th Armoured Brigade's TAC HQ was close to the wreck of C Squadron and under the impression that Cagny was still the main problem. And then Cagny is still the Guard's responsibility from even higher up at Division. Based on what he knew, Brigadier Harvey still believed the ridge could be reached, hence those orders, but at 12:58 we're securing a line to renew attack later. In a complete blag, we're not actually far off the progress or disposition up to this point. In game, it actually looks like this. So we have the remains of 2nd, 5th and 4th FAR in Four alongside the rifle companies. B Squadron is mostly wrecked to our south, and 23rd Hussars have arrived. So it's 12:31 in game, but this is accountable with some compression for the scenario. Neither regiment has communications with one another, so 23rd Hussars are completely unaware, and in the Burg they're still going to use similar tactics. On the bigger picture, we're now holding here, in a line from Bra to Four, and it's just short of our ridgeline objective. This then is probably a good moment to evaluate the situation from both regiments' perspectives and plan out some new orders. So the situation in game from the 2nd, 5th and 4th FAR and the rifles, they currently have an unknown number of AT guns in Soliers. They also know about the AT guns up on Bourguébus Ridge, and they can see 5 to 6 Panthers counter-attacking down the ridge towards Four. 23rd Hussars have far less awareness of what's going on, so they can see a mass of smoke to their south and southeast, and then they can see friendly tank destroyers engaging to their west. Like we say, there's no communications between 2nd, 5th and 4th FAR and 23rd Hussars, and then more generally there's no cover on the open fields other than the contours of the land, and there is still smoke, which is reducing visibility to the ridge. In terms of the new missions that we have, we're assuming that 2nd, 5th and 4th FAR need to defend Four, so they're going to have to defeat the enemy counterattack coming down that slope. 23rd Hussars have been told that they must seize Soliers, and then the rifles we believe are probably going to need to support the seizure of Soliers, but they don't actually have, again, communications with 23rd Hussars to coordinate this. In terms of freedoms and constraints, it feels like we're heavy on the constraints side. We have freedom of fire, so there's no restrictions on the destruction of enemy occupied villages. We've already called in those fighter bombers to defeat the counterattack, and our artillery gives us the option to level enemy positions in the village of Soliers if necessary. But considering the constraints, our limited situational awareness is a big concern. It feels risky for the 23rd Hussars to blast away without knowing the location of friendly forces. We can assume that they know friendly forces are in the general area of Four, not Soliers, based on the wider communications, but it's still a consideration. After this, a big constraint for the force is the lack of combined arms. So attempting to assault Soliers with 23rd Hussars tanks on their own would be a poor tactical decision, almost as bad as the one where B Squadron went into that ambush. Ideally, we should first link up with the motor rifles to mount an effective attack. That does still leave us with the problem of who actually should take the infantry. Is the German counterattack combined arms? Will we need them to defend Four? And once that's done, we have the geographic limitations. So our freedom of manoeuvre is constrained by the terrain and enemy positions. Our line of attack feels limited to a narrow north-south approach. You could look at the east-west advance from Four, but this exposes your flank to enemy tanks that are coming down that hill, so it makes it a very high-risk option. So basically I went away and, based on the situation as I understood it from either perspective, I asked myself what could the enemy do to prevent me achieving the mission, and then with a little bit of planning put together two different plans from two different perspectives. We then got this sort of execution, which covers the concept of the operation, mission statement and coordinating instruction, and we'll look at those next. So starting with the 23rd Hussars, concept of operations. This is a tank-only assault with no confirmed infantry support. The squadron will advance from the north to seize Soliers by direct armoured action, with firepower and speed. Due to the absence of dismounted troops, the squadron will avoid entering narrow streets or confined spaces unless necessary. Priority will be placed on suppressing enemy strongpoints from standoff distance and maintaining mutual support between troops. The approach will be cautious and methodical, using bounding movements, smoke for concealment, and focused fire to neutralise threats before advancing. Efforts will be made to establish contact with 2nd, 5th and 4th Yeomanry or their company from the Rifle Brigade during or immediately after the seizure of Soliers. Until such link-up occurs, the squadron must operate self-sufficiently. Mission statement: 23rd Hussars is to advance south and seize the village of Soliers no later than 13:30 hours, 18th of July 1944, to secure the line of departure for further operations against Bourguébus Ridge. No movement is to be made beyond the southern edge of Soliers. Coordinating instructions: identify targets before engaging due to possible friendly elements in the area. A liaison officer is to move to F Company HQ immediately on contact. Then for the forces we started with, so 2nd, 5th and 4th, F Company and E Company. Concept of operations: the defence will be conducted in layers with no fixed front line. So firstly we're going to have forward observation and ambushes. We'll look to have infantry sections and OPs posted on the road and hedgerows south of the village to provide early warning and delay the attackers. And then secondly, recognising the limitations that we've got with the Sherman tanks against those Panthers frontal armour, we're going to prioritise mobility, camouflage and positional advantage to gain flank or rear shots on any attacking enemy armour. Mission statement: 2nd, 5th and 4th and F Company are to hold the village of Four and prevent enemy penetration along the north-south route until relieved or ordered to withdraw. Coordinating instructions: tanks will not remain in any one firing position after firing in the turn, and no tanks are to engage Panthers frontally unless immobilised or isolated. Taking that and applying it to the log took about 5 minutes, which I won't bore you with. Then it took another 20 turns to play out the orders. Again, I won't bore you with the details because it was a lot of repositioning and traffic management, but there were 3 or 4 interesting things that came out of those turns. Firstly was the time it took to manoeuvre. The entire 23rd Hussars Regiment arrived in the space of about 5 minutes, and I quickly found the fields north of Four and Soliers heaving with tanks. This is probably the largest mission I've played so far, and I'd thought it was difficult handling a battalion, but rearranging 23rd Hussars into formations and then spreading them out took quite a bit of time, so it felt like I was steering a massive ship. If I had to do it again, I think I'd spend more time thinking about how the units deploy into attack formations, because the delays that were caused by the traffic seemed to take forever to fix. This actually has some resemblance with real life though, so although the big traffic issue in 1944 was further north at the bridgehead, where they were struggling to press units into battle, it still took up quite a great deal of time. I never actually thought I'd find a chapter on bridging or traffic so interesting, but in the book there's actually some great diagrams, maps, aerial photography that demonstrate the problem that was seen here. When the Brits actually went into action, I believe they only managed to form up the lead division on the eastern side of the Orne. Part of the deployment also covered linking up with 2nd, 5th and 4th. Because I was playing with Iron Mode, I can again see the picture from unit to unit and the different perspectives of the field, but at 20 minutes in I still don't believe that contact has been made. 6th Troop has managed to track down the TAC HQ manor in Four, but looking at the ghost icons I don't believe the information of Four's capture is getting through to 23rd Hussars over the radio. This is still a little mystery of the game engine to me, so 6th Troop has parked right next to the HQ units, and this is E, F and HQ companies, but the intelligence picture just seems stuck at that first hedgerow. It might be taking a while to explain, maybe 6th Troop can't cut in over the radio, I can't really say why they're not being updated. I was starting to have second thoughts about moving F Company though. This is partly due to their condition, so one of the platoons has been quite badly beaten, and I don't know if the unit is capable of taking another larger village. But as things were playing out, it looked as though the Panthers on the hilltop were actually halting to reinforce the ridge rather than counterattack, so the defensive force seemed less pressing. The next point was support, and again, it's another case of forward thinking that causes delays. So firstly, for the artillery, I'd called in a general mission on Soliers, but I hadn't really thought about what I wanted to achieve with it. It took a very long time to call in, and by the time it was actually falling, 23rd Hussars had deployed, but now they had to wait for it to finish. This is actually playing quite closely to Rule 1B, so once placed, indirect artillery can't be cancelled, and the explanation for the rule is perfect, so I'll just read it out. The purpose behind this rule is to force the player to think about and use the built-in duration settings for artillery. This is more realistic than ordering an artillery mission and ceasing fire when you notice that it's done the required damage or is not producing the required results, a bit like us. Also, especially in World War II, communications were not as advanced as they are today, so it's doubtful that comms with the fire direction centre or battery or gun delivering the fire would be as responsive as expected. So cancelling a fire mission would not be a simple thing if it was possible at all. So in my case, it just ended up holding up the 23rd Hussars and didn't really achieve anything. And that's mostly down to the fact I'd not thought about the effect I wanted. Did I want to shock or suppress? Was I trying to neutralise? I hadn't put any thought into that. As they sat outside the village, the tanks began blasting up the buildings and hedgerows, and this was actually probably more effective. It allowed for more direct fire, and it felt like an acceptable trade-off for the amount of ammunition that was being expended. This actually ended up being a little bit like a British tactic used later in the war that was called pepper pot. So during the Battle of the Reichswald, which is covered in the final Blitzkrieg expansion, the fire plan ahead of the attack involved massed artillery that we've often seen in the Normandy game, but it also included things like Vickers machine guns, mortars, anti-aircraft guns, and a bit like this, tanks firing indirectly. And the idea basically is to saturate German positions with high volumes of fire based on the observation that suppression was often more about the sheer volume and continuous nature of fire rather than the size of an individual shell. Lastly, for air support, I withdrew the FO away from the forward edge of 4 far too early. At the moment I'd heard a plane in the air and saw the icon showing attacking, I had them jump in the carrier and race off. The problem was the Typhoon then had absolutely no guidance. I thought this was a target-rich environment, but in fairness, from the air, this probably just looked like a bunch of tanks burning, and the pilot didn't really have a clue whose they were. By the time the FO was back in a tall building at the other end of 4, the Typhoon decided to fly off, which cancelled the mission. And again, this should have been a really obvious one to me, but the FO is more effective when they are calling the plane onto the target. And beside that, it should be historically interesting. So 1944, I believe RAF pilots were beginning to take turns in, I think it was called Ground Liaison Officer. And it's sort of a precursor to the forward air controller that we see today. And the way it would work is they would be calling in and directing air support from the cab ranks. So these are orbiting fighter bombers. And it's mainly drawing on their expertise because they understand the pilot's perspective. As an example, they would know what the attacking pilot would be able to see from the air. They could then give instructions using landmarks, and it would be in terms or language that another pilot would understand. But I'd lost that ability, so I've wasted a mission. And then on top of that, there's a further delay. So I decided to call off calling them back in until the second plane arrived, and then I was going to call them in as a pair. So that's another delay on top of the delay it takes to call them in. The last 7 turns have seen the 23rd Hussars inch their way towards Soliers. Their advance has been careful, and perhaps too careful. We've got tanks leapfrogging forward and artillery shifting up to harass German positions in depth. It's all deliberate, methodical, and worryingly close to what we've already done before, which sort of undermines the whole point of a breakout operation and risks sliding into an anticlimax. I also realise these videos don't follow a neat logical line of thought. They jump around as the battle unfolds, shifting from one focus to another, sometimes almost incoherently. The truth is, I'm producing them in chunks as events happened. It's such a huge battle, and I genuinely thought I'd end up fighting it a very different way. The first video was all about the planning and the initial dash into that ambush. The second covered the reassessment, abandoning the gap and committing to take Four, since the gap was suicide. This third video reassesses the situation again, this time against history and the actual flow of the battle, which appears to show the Germans reinforcing the ridge. And then next, I honestly don't know yet. With just 45 minutes of gameplay remaining, something needs to happen, otherwise we risk ending on a dull note. I think there's 3 options. So option 1 would be a bit of rule bending coordination. It's against the spirit of the comms rule that I'm using, but not against the spirit of the story. So what we played to is the idea that a message somehow gets through from the Hussars to F Company, and the infantry rush across to work in tandem with the armour. So we've got the Shermans providing the firepower, while F Company clears the alleys. Once Soliers is secured, that then opens the door for a proper tank-on-tank clash between the village and the ridge, which might give us a bit of a cinematic combined arms climax. The next option is that the Hussars go it alone, so forgetting caution, no infantry screens, no alleyway clearances, the Shermans just thunder straight through Soliers and rely on the shock action and sheer speed, with machine guns blazing to suppress any Panzerfaust teams. This is probably quite reckless and brutal, and it could easily bog down, but it gives us a bit of a gamble. Is either the Hussars are going to burst through to the southern edge, or the streets are going to become choked with wrecks. And the third option is a even more audacious gamble. So our orders are clear, don't go beyond Soliers. But what if the Hussars commander sees an opening? Rather than grinding through the village, what if he gambles on a flanking thrust, skirting round Soliers and driving hard for the ridge itself? This could try and catch the enemy armour on the hop before it has a chance to fully reinforce the ridge, but it risks all the same problems that B Squadron 2nd, 5 and 4th are experienced. If it works though, the Hussars could cut off the defenders inside Soliers, and they could contest the ridgeline. So I'll call it there and give all of these a try. I think counterintuitively, the order I'm going to do is most risk to least risk. This way I don't learn the scenario and refine the risky options until they work. But hopefully in the next video, what we'll have is some interesting outcomes, and then we can finish off by looking a little at the real events. So catch you in the next one.